Good day, my name is Todd Standing. This is my Sasquatch Sunday video. This is a profound video I'm doing today because this is the most significant Sasquatch encounter that I've ever heard of, where the Sasquatch that's been named Kubota, we're gonna talk about how Kubota got his name today, actually tried to abduct a woman. And the only thing that can stop a woman from being abducted by a Sasquatch when you're backcountry in the wilderness is a Sasquatch. And that's what happens in this incident. This incident is so profound. I've known about it for over 2 years now. This is a really big deal in my life, and there's so many ramifications that are going to come out after this. It's enormous. So we'll get into that video. We're going to do that today. We're going to discuss it and talk about where it's going to go and how this is so tremendously significant. This is absolutely enormous. This is a huge deal. So stay tuned. It's going to be a great show today. The masters of civilization, my people, sure could learn a lot from the masters of the wilderness, which is who they are.
There's no way that you got sight of a Sasquatch in those areas with those tree breaks, with those tracks, getting those apples taken, with those sounds, all these things.
So here's the backstory. So what happened was in 2011, two people from two Europeans, one lady that's gonna come forward and talk all about this and is ready to discuss this openly. Her name is Ina, and that's very significant for her whole encounter and attempted abduction. This is enormous. This is absolutely mind-blowing that this happened. I've known about this for years. Ina and her boyfriend didn't really want to talk about this. It was very traumatizing, but things have changed, and now Ina is going to come forward and start talking about this and go public about it, which is very exciting for me. So the reason this keeps coming up, and the reason I've been talking to Ina and her boyfriend recently, is people want to know, how did Kubota get his name? And I keep saying I didn't name him. But they did, or they found out what Kubota's name is, and that's what's going to be, we're going to go through that today. So the backstory is, this couple from Europe, this was a big dream of theirs. They were going to do a backcountry expedition. They got their backcountry permits to come into Canada, and they came backcountry through my wild bunch, the Sasquatch group. And so it's 3 days into the backcountry they're doing, 3 or 4 days, depending on how fast you go. They'd planned to do 4 days through the backcountry, and as they were coming on their last halfway through their expedition, they were hearing yells. They were getting rocks tossed at them. They were seeing dark figures move around in the bush at day and at night. So it's Sasquatch. It's the Wild Bunch. It's my crew. We're out there. You know, Jake, Jacob, Jane, the big dominant male, and Kubota are out in the bush. This is approximately a year after I filmed Jake. Jake was still part of the troop. I witnessed Jake back in 2014 was the last time I saw him. So he was still definitively in the area. So they come hiking through here, and they're from Europe. They're both athletic. They're both very intelligent, well-educated people, but rugby players, we'll say that. And the boyfriend has not decided to come public yet because he just doesn't want to, and that's fine. But Ina is going to go public. She's going to come, and we'll get into that a little later, what's happening with Ina. So anyways, these two are going backcountry, and the Sasquatch are very interested in them. We'll say that. They're coming around and whatnot. So I'm not going to use computer graphics. I'm going to explain this the way my native teacher would have explained it, and that's by we're going to go old Indian style, and we're going to talk about exactly where they were, and I'm going to try not to put too much of my spin on it right now. Let's get into precisely what was happening. So in the morning, so we're going to go to my little diagram that I've got, my wilderness diagram. So in the morning, this is going on. This is about 2 hours after sunup. They're getting a lot of movement in the wilderness off to their left. So they're hearing creatures moving around. Something's out there in the bush. There's sounds. There was a couple yells in the night that they heard. So they're very, very concerned. So this is the diagram that I have for us. So in this diagram, so the two people, this is the boyfriend, this is the girlfriend. The girlfriend's back a little bit. The girlfriend's back a little bit. This is the tree line. This is going to represent our tree line where the Sasquatch are making sounds and whatnot. So what actually happened is, so again, I'm going to animate this as best I can. I need to have my, so Kubota is over here, and on this side this is representing another tree line. This stick here is the best I can to represent another tree line. So this is the other tree line. So this is approximately, let's say this is 60 meters this way, and then this other tree line over here where the main Sasquatch are is about 50 meters away. So what happens is, again, so here's the two people. So Kubota comes out up here. Let's see if we can get the people in Kubota. So Kubota's up here, and Kubota comes precisely in the wind gauge, but he's following kind of away. So they're seeing Kubota at this point. So Kubota's come out. This is the tree line. Kubota's just out. So they're standing up, and Kubota is making sounds. Kubota is crashing around, bashing, picking up rocks, throwing rocks is what they said. So boyfriend gets in front of an Ina. Ina has a bear banger, and boyfriend has bear spray. So Ina, as Kubota's coming out and acting very aggressive up on the over by the tree line, Ina takes a shot at Kubota with the bear banger. And when she shoots the bear banger, Kubota maneuvers back behind the tree line to evade it. So they only have that one bear banger shot until Kubota comes back out and across. Now Kubota is moving back across this way, and what's really important to know is the wind gauge. They weren't really aware of it until in a few minutes they'll be aware of it, but the wind gauge is going like this. So Kubota is moving based on the wind gauge, which makes this so authentic to me, because that's exactly what they do. So the bear banger's been shot. Ina is not reloading. She's terrified right now, and her boyfriend is in front of her. So the Sasquatch approaches directly into the wind gauge at them. When he's about, and he's acting very aggressive, they're getting a really clear look at his whole body. There's nothing but rocks around here. As he got approximately 20 yards away, the boyfriend shoots bear spray at him, at which time Kubota moves directly around in this direction, and as the bear spray is being shot at him, the wind is blowing it away from Kubota. So Kubota evades completely the bear spray, goes into high gear, comes at the boyfriend from this angle, and removes him from the equation by bashing him in the chest, dropping him back about 15 yards. Kubota then latches on to Ina, and at this point, Ina describes Kubota as bumping her, reaching around, and grabbing her by the hips. So grabbing her by the hips, flipping her and spinning her. So what's happened is her head is back, but if I'm Kubota, Ina's head is back this way. He's got her by the hip like this, with her head facing that way and her feet facing forward. So Kubota's got a hold of her now, and Kubota is moving away from the boyfriend, but into the wilderness. Now the boyfriend gets up, winded, and notices that the Sasquatch in the tree line on the left, the opposite from the direction Kubota are making lots of sounds. They're bashing trees, crashing things, and really getting crazy. So at this time, the Sasquatch are bashing around and crazy, and Kubota's got her, and he's walking with her towards the wilderness. And it seems like the Sasquatch disappear as Kubota moves towards the wilderness. He's moving along the tree line, but not going back into the bush. He's staying about 30 yards away from the wilderness. And then at the top, so on their left, where all the Sasquatch are, at the top of the mountain, there's a big scream, like a rah, like they describe it as it's the big dominant male. And Kubota freezes in his tracks, takes Ina, turns his body position, and takes a few steps back away. Ina is completely helpless. Ina can't do anything. She's trying to bang on Kubota's leg, and Kubota is about 8'4". Kubota weighs about 700 pounds. He's gonna have no trouble holding her and subduing her whatsoever, which is the case. That's what Ina describes. She's levitated off the ground. Ina is 5'9", and at the time she was approximately 150 pounds. So not tremendously heavy, but a very athletic woman, strong, rugby player girl, right? So the boyfriend gets up, kind of shocked, starts moving over towards Kubota. Kubota isn't even paying attention to him. And as the boyfriend starts moving forward, he hears what he described as King Kong bashing down through the trees. And everybody stops. Kubota takes a couple steps back, away from the tree line that's to everybody's left as they're facing south, and down about 2 trees out, the big dominant male comes running down to the bush, and he's got a big boulder in his hand, and he's smashing, crashing through the bush. Ina did not see this. This is what the boyfriend witnessed. And now Kubota takes a few more steps back away from the wilderness as the big dominant male Sasquatch comes 2 trees out from the tree line, and he yells, "Kubota, Ia, Ina," and he points to the ground. So this is exactly what, so the boyfriend's witnessing this. Ina can hear it. So he yells loud and clearly, "Kubota, Ia," and it sounded like the last thing he said was Ina, and he's pointing to the ground. So he says that very clearly once. The boyfriend hears it, and the lady, Ina, hears it very clearly. They heard Kubota, Ia, and then it sounded like Ina. So they're telling me that they can't be sure it was Ina was the last, because that's her name, is Ina. That's why the name had to come out in this story. That's why I couldn't even do this, because I've never heard a Sasquatch speak. And they've told me that it's a very growly, deep, like it wasn't in human kind of sounding voice. It was in a big, deep, profound, growly, I would call it primate voice, that said, "Kubota, Ia, Ina," and he's pointing at the ground forcefully, is what the boyfriend tells me. So at that point, and so that's the first call, and then the big Sasquatch, Kubota, takes a couple steps back and starts moving away from the big Sasquatch, at which time that Sasquatch smashes over a tree, which is still there, and says Kubota one more time, loudly, and points at the ground. Kubota, and points to the ground. At which time, Kubota releases Ina, drops her on the ground. Ina runs back to her boyfriend, and Kubota starts having a little fit. She said that the boyfriend says Kubota started picking up rocks and just throwing them all over the place. And then Kubota ran back into the wilderness on the side the Sasquatch were, going hard north. It would have been northeast at that time, or northwest, sorry. It had been northwest, at which time the big giant Sasquatch went back into the woods, looking like he was even in a pursuit, and they never heard anything after that, other than the running through the bush of them up over the mountain onto the other side. At which time, so now this is where the story gets really significant, that we can start tracing things, because they had a sat phone and they called for help. So they explained what had happened to them, and of course they didn't know what to say. It was a Sasquatch. They phone Fish and Wildlife and say that their girlfriend was nearly abducted by a giant hairy man. So what happened was they spent the next 8 hours trekking to meet up with Fish and Wildlife, exiting the area as fast as they could. Fish and Wildlife met up with them. They were very traumatized, and they reported to police that a big group of big giant hairy men, Sasquatch, giant men, tried to abduct her, latched onto her, tried to abduct her. They tried to hit him with bear spray. Do you understand how significant that maneuvering the bear spray is like that, based on the wind? The wind, according to both witnesses, was approximately 15 kilometers an hour, which is approximately 10 miles an hour. So there was a decent wind. I've been to the area. I went back to the area. I couldn't find the exact bust. I was looking for the busted over tree from the big male. I couldn't find it. But this is where the story gets really significant, is Ina has agreed to next year at the same time of year, so 2021, approximately 1 year from today, she's going to go back into the backcountry with me alone, and we're going to go back to that spot and spend a couple nights in that spot. So I can't even believe she's been traumatized, but and so same with her boyfriend. They were very traumatized by the incident and very scared. But Ina wants some answers. And how did I get involved? Well, in 2018, they saw my movie Discovering Bigfoot on Netflix, and that's Kubota. And that's how Kubota got his name. That's when I named Kubota, is when she called me and told me Kubota latched onto her and did all these things, and her boyfriend corroborated it. They actually met with Fish and Wildlife. They have their plane tickets that they bumped up. They went home 3 days earlier than they were supposed to, and she doesn't have any record. Neither has any kind of record. They just reported to Fish and Wildlife. Fish and Wildlife escorted them out. A Fish and Wildlife officer. It started out they met one Fish and Wildlife officer, then it was two, and they got escorted out and went home. They made a report to the police about this. Don't know about any kind of follow-up. They actually went home after that, back to Europe. So they were completely done with this. But when they saw, so this happened in approximately 2012, within a year of the time I filmed Kubota. So we didn't actually meet though and have any kind of discussion until they saw my documentary on Netflix in 2018. It's when they both worked to get a hold of me, got a hold of me, told me about the area. The area that they had this incident is approximately, what did I have it down to? 11 kilometers, so about seven miles from where I filmed Kubota. That's how, that if you understand how that is, as the crow flies, it's 11 kilometers, 7 miles from where I filmed Kubota is where Kubota tried to abduct this lady. And quite clearly, the only thing that stopped this abduction was the giant male of the group. In fact, my perspective on it is, first of all, Kubota was brilliant in his maneuvering towards them. To wait for the bear bang, I don't think he was waiting for the bear banger shot, but to take that bear banger shot and then evade in the trees and then come out and maneuver towards them, waiting for that bear spray. He must have known about bear spray. I can't explain how he would have. So when you shoot bear spray like that, what happens is you only have about 15 yards, I would say approximately. And that's when the man let it go. Between the 15 and 20 yards, he was a little premature on the bear spray shot. And Kubota just went around using the wind gauge. So as the spray came out, the wind was blowing it away from him. Once the spray was done, Kubota moved directly back in, hit the man. And the way the boyfriend was hit, I've been hit by a Sasquatch like that. And I have to admit, this is very important you understand this. Kubota didn't want to hurt that man. He wanted to remove him from the equation. The way the guy explains it is because he's a rugby player. He's been tackled. He's been hit before. He's been smashed by men. What happened was Kubota latched onto him, like put his hand on him, and he could feel the Kubota absorbing, decreasing the impact on the boyfriend's body, and shoving him up with a very smooth acceleration curve and tossing him. Now, the Sasquatch have done this to me once before. They did it to me after I filmed Jake in 2010, where I was pursuing Jake, and a Sasquatch came out of nowhere. I had a long lens camera and did that same thing where he shoved me, but it felt like it was gentle, harder, faster, and then really fast at the end. The last little bit of shove was clearly the Sasquatch trying not to harm me, but also throwing me a good 10 yards. And according to the boyfriend, he was thrown approximately 15 yards in a weird, strange way with that smooth acceleration curve. Because you have to understand, if Kubota smashes him, if Kubota hits him with full force, he might kill him. It's like a truck. A 700-pound primate smashes you, you're going to get broken bones for sure, and you might not get up from that, especially when there's rocks all over the place. So he was gently thrown as best he could, and then Ina got picked up, and Ina telling me about how nothing's ever manhandled her like that. It was the way Kubota had a hold of her hips and his hand on her. She said she felt light. She felt like a rag doll the way he was maneuvering her around, and she was trying to bang his leg and scratch him and gouge him. But just the way he was able to position her and maneuver her by holding on to her hips and keeping her arms away from his body whenever she tried to grab at him, because she was flipping out. She was yelling and she was flipping out, and she stopped though when she heard the big Sasquatch screaming that name. And it was, again, so we'll do it one last time. It was Kubota, Ia, Ina, and then the point. And then a few seconds later, after Kubota didn't let Ina go, was just a yell, Kubota, and then pointing to the ground. And the boyfriend says he actually saw the finger point to the ground, like voraciously drop, and that the Sasquatch looked very angry. He smashed over a tree very violently, just tore it right, smashed it right out of the ground. And that'll be a good, Ina is going to take me back and show me where that busted tree is, because after they told me about this, I was so blown away, and they wanted me to keep it confidential, which I have no problem doing. But things have changed recently where Ina has asked to come on an expedition with me, and I've obviously said yes. Can you imagine the exact days she wants to come out that she had the incident before? So, and it was I would say mid-spring that they did this expedition where all the snow is nicely melted, and she wants to do the exact dates. And so many of these things make sense to me about what they're saying. I have the spot pinpointed. I know because I was around over on the other side of the mountains during that time. So I know where the elk herd was. I know where the main group is. The main group where the Sasquatch were. So if I'm them and I'm looking where Kubota is, so Kubota's on this side of me and the Sasquatch were over there. Well, over there on the other side of that mountain is the elk herd. And then beyond the elk herd is the main spot where the Sasquatch troop is. So my theory behind what happened was, so the Sasquatch probably weren't agreeable to Kubota doing this. Kubota kind of was being a jerk, and Kubota is a jerk. Kubota has acted that way. I brought a woman out there before, and Kubota was acting strange, and it scared the woman that was with me. And anyways, that was pretty minor, pretty superficial. This is Kubota actually latching on to a woman, like physically latching on to her. And the other Sasquatch seemed to be protesting it. The other Sasquatch seemed to be alerting the big dominant male, I just call him the male, I don't want to call him the dad of the group, but the big dominant male. And the big dominant male came back, and the direction he would have come from is where the main troop is, just on the other side of the elk. That the Sasquatch, that's their elk herd, this main troop, that's their main source of food, I believe, is that elk herd. They maneuver those elk around, and those elk don't get touched by bears or wolves. The calves that come out of there are untouched virtually by the bears and wolves. So I'm strongly convinced the Sasquatch are protecting and herding and feeding off of that group of elk. And everything they're saying absolutely makes perfect sense to me. They were in the right place, the right time, and that's when they saw Kubota. I mean, they've got them nailed. Even the body shape of Kubota. They explained. So they saw vaguely some Sasquatch running around maybe 6 levels of trees back where they could just see shadows moving around. But the big dominant male, they say, was significantly larger. He looked like almost double the size, much more muscular than Kubota. Kubota is, I mean, he's 700 pounds, but his arms look a little longer than the normal Sasquatch. Or maybe he has Sasquatch size arms and his body is a little smaller. His muscles aren't as bulging. He's not as thick. His traps aren't as big. He just doesn't look like, again, he's approximately 8'4", but 700 pounds, right? Where I'd say the big dominant male is 9'4", and probably, 950 pounds. So they really noticed a big size difference. They noticed that Kubota was blacker than the big dominant male. So very, very black in the face, and his body was, black. Just Kubota's black. So I wouldn't even say blacker. I just would say Kubota's black, and the dominant male of the group is dark brown. And the browns were noticeable to them that the big dominant male was brown and that Kubota was black. And everything about Kubota. I mean, I shot that piece of footage, again, within 1 year of when Kubota tried to abduct this woman was when I got my footage. So that's really significant. They immediately recognized him, and they had a very clear look at his entire body, the way he moved. The details are incredible. And I have all this written down by both. They both wrote their accounting of the situation, and of course it matches up. And they both explain him as, he liked to move very low, and he's very sneaky. He always moves like that. His eyes weren't blinking fast like my video, and I'll show you a segment of my Kubota video at the end of this. But yeah, when they saw, you know, they were traumatized and knew that they had to contact me. And then when we all discovered that it was not just the same area, but definitively Kubota is Kubota. It's the same Sasquatch. And that's when I picked up the name Kubota. And it wasn't me that named him. It was that the two people that had an incredible encounter with a dark looking Sasquatch, or the dark Kubota Sasquatch. I don't know, just call him Kubota, right? And that name Kubota. So yeah, that's the reaccounting. So I'm going to film the heck out of the ENA expedition in 1 year from now, from when this video is released, approximately, maybe a year and 2 weeks. And I'll film that all up, and maybe that'll be in Discovering Bigfoot Part 3. We'll see what happens. See if Kubota's still out there, and if Kubota still remembers. This is a long time ago. This is, you know, approximately 8 years ago now, so this isn't new stuff. And Ina is not with that person who was her boyfriend at the time. They are not together anymore. They're friends, but the boyfriend has no desire to come back at all to Canada, period. And Ina needs some closure on the subject. I've talked to her a lot about this, and Ina has blonde hair, and she's from Ireland, so she lives in Ireland. That's her home, and there'll be more about her next year. So I'm not going to talk about this. I know there'll be questions, and I'll answer them as best I can. But yeah, that's our plan. Is even Ina wants to. Ina's going to find a way to see if she can find out where the report is that she filed with her boyfriend. What does the wildlife officer have to say? Because there wasn't any follow-up at all, according to her. There was no follow-up. They made their reports and they just left and went home, and nobody ever called them again, and they never heard a word about it again from anybody. There's nothing beyond that. So they didn't know. They weren't Sasquatch believers. Obviously, they are now. They had an incredible eyewitness accounting of Kubota in open ground. They saw Kubota, open ground, cloudy day. It hadn't rained in the whole time that they were out there. It had been cloudy and sunny. It was beautiful weather for them, and what an incredible, amazing story, right? So that is one of the most amazing accountings I've ever heard of. Specifically, and I had to start talking about this because people keep asking me about, have I ever heard Sasquatch speak? And the answer is I have not. I've heard them growl, but their accounting of this moment that Kubota, the big male called that Sasquatch potentially Kubota, and we could be completely wrong about this, but I'm very happy, and it feels right calling him Kubota. So that's just where we're at right now. So really fantastic stuff. It's amazing, some of the encounters that people have had with Sasquatch, and this is the most authentic, corroborating story. Can you imagine Ina coming back out here? She knows the name of the wildlife officer that she met, so we're gonna go track him down and talk to him and see what he has to say about it. So this will be a whole sequence, probably in Discovering Bigfoot Part 3, especially if something happens. So I'm highly skeptical. I've been to this area many times. We'll see what happens. Obviously, the Sasquatch found them very interesting, and that's a really, really cool thing. I think there's a lot of sightings in this area. I think there's tons of sightings. Just that who you tell and who knows about this and who, you know what I mean. It's pretty profound. The boyfriend has not gotten support from his family. They think it's ridiculous and they don't really believe that it happened. But Ina has. Ina's family's really supported her, and they know she's a really good, honest girl, and they know she's telling the truth. And they've been very supportive, but she needs some closure on this, and she's very excited to come out with me, and I'm very excited to have her. So lots of new stuff coming. Stay tuned. We'll do Wednesday lives, Throwback Thursday. This is my Sasquatch Sunday video. Thank you very much for listening, and lots more to come, so stay tuned for that. Thanks. The Sasquatch you see was in the shadow of this tree root and barely visible to the naked eye. But thanks to the high sensitivity sensor on this camera, the images I was able to record were very impressive. God damn it, focus beyond. This Sasquatch is looking down at me, likely shocked by this odd behavior I'm exhibiting.